can hear that clock is ticking. It's after 11 o'clock, and you know what that means. It means it's time for your favorite show and mine, Countdown to Armageddon. I'm your host, Publius, bringing you the latest insights of what I see happen around us. And today I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, that gift that keeps on giving, Maxine Waters. Y'all remember Maxine Waters, who came out back during the Trump presidency and called for everybody to get into the face of anybody that supported Trump and all the people on his cabinet and everybody else to make sure they knew they weren't wanted. Well, she shot her mouth off again over the weekend, and this time she was telling BLM and the other protesters they need to be more confrontational. I mean, come on. This is one group of people. These are groups of people that don't need any instruction on being confrontational. Now, she's going to sit there and say, well, I wasn't telling them to go to violence. Well, how much more confrontational can they go without becoming violent? The reality is she was calling for violence. You know, there seems to be a double standard in the world today where calling for more confrontation, calling for people to get in somebody else's face is not considered inciting a riot, when yet telling someone to show up and protest is. I mean, former President Trump, gets removed because his words might be deemed as potentially calls to violence, when he's never called for violence. He doesn't call for people to get in someone's face. He doesn't call for any of things like this. But yet, somebody who actually does, and whose words can easily lead to violence, is given a pass. What on earth is going on in this world? Well, part of what's going on in this world is, number one, nobody expects better from Maxine Waters. She's allowed to get away with it because she's a Democrat. Number two, she's a black Democrat, which means she can say whatever she wants. And no one is ever going to stand up and say, nah, that's crossing the line. Why? Because Democrats don't do wrong. Republicans, they don't have enough spine to stand up and protect their own. But they would quickly call out one of their own for doing things that much less than this. For just having beliefs that nobody agrees with. They lose their seats. They're not seated as any committees. Example for you is the Georgia Congresswoman Green, who has no seats in Congress. She's not on any committees. Why? Because they don't agree with what she says. And they find her words to be hateful. A lot of what she says is simply make America great. America first. Oh no, we can't have that. That's hateful. That leads to racism. That leads to violence. And Maxine Waters' idea of getting in your face doesn't? I'm sorry, you get in someone's face, you're asking for violence. You get more confrontational than BLM already is. I mean, how much more confrontational can they be without being violent? They already go in and harass diners. They chant and they walk up and down. They barge in. They sit down at your table. They drink your drinks. I mean, how much further do you want them to get? They demand that diners and people sitting there minding their own business must stop what they're doing and raise their hands in solidarity with them, or be labeled as a racist or a white supremacist. So how much further can they go without actually going directly to violence? And let's be honest, it's not very hard for BLM or Antifa to go across that line into violence. Look at last year. All last year we were told, well, it was a mostly peaceful demonstration. Well, mostly means it wasn't entirely. You want to look at the majority of the people who were not engaged in violence? Sure, they weren't. But the minute the violence started happening, the fact that those non-violent people stayed and continued protesting made them culpable, made them just as guilty as the violent ones. It's called guilt by association. Contributing to the cause after the fact, however we want to look at it. And Maxine Waters wants them to be more confrontational. Well, that means for the Majority of the peaceful protesters, that means they should become a little bit less peaceful. For the non-peaceful protesters, well, I guess 38 people dying last summer wasn't enough. Let's see how many more can die this year. Oh Lord, this world is going to hell in a handbasket, and it's on the express lane to do it. Common decency is gone. The protests of the 60s, these are not the protests of today. These are not the same protesters. In the 60s, when they did their sit-ins and they blocked things, they knew they were going to get arrested. That was part of the purpose of their protest, was to show they stood up for their beliefs enough to be arrested. They were marched off to jail, taken, and hey, let's face it, back then they knew there was a chance the cops were going to beat them in the process. They faced this bravely, and that's what enacted the change. That's what got so many people to support the protests, is these people firmly believed what they were protesting was wrong, and they were willing to go to jail to say that. Today's modern protesters, they're not willing to go to jail. They're going to cry if you send them to jail. I mean, look at the number of times that these protesters have been taken to jail, and when they face the judge, but we were just protesting. We were just protesting with Molotov cocktails in our hands, and it's not our fault that we threw them. No, today's protester is not the same. Today's protester is, secretly at least, for the majority, and openly for the others, out for violence. Protesters in the 60s wanted change. They wanted to promote a change in the system. The system would get better. Today's protester, they just want to burn the system down. And you have members of Congress that are telling them to get worse about this. You have members of Congress who actually say yes. Burn it down. Burn it all down to the ground. Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, AOC, all of the squad has come out and stated things along the lines of burn it down. There's no fixing it. Now you have Maxine Waters telling them to get more confrontational. And she's going to sit back and say, no, but I wasn't calling for violence. She's going to try to defend this as this is not a call to violence. This is a call to stand up, to be more open, more visible. Well, that would be fine, except that it's still calling for violence. Her words will directly lead to violence. President Trump's words had to be taken out of context to be put that way. And yet they can impeach him for that. They can impeach him claiming he invited sedition to have people come out and protest the U.S. Congress. No, folks. The double standard is growing. And now, of all times, when the U.S. is sitting on the verge of having a major rash of protests come out this weekend, her words are even more dangerous. Because the next protest isn't, months down the line. The next major protest is probably going to be this weekend. Why? Because the court case is almost finished. What court case? This is the court case up in Minnesota that started all the riots last year, where the police officer was kneeling on the neck of a suspect who happened to be black, and the man died. Now, the facts in the case are not what everybody wishes they would be. There's no open and close. Very simple. The cop killed him. Because sadly, the coroner is going to tell you the man died from a drug overdose. He's already said it. That he did not die from homicide. He died from an overdose. Hopefully, when he was charged for manslaughter or contributing to. I don't know. I haven't really looked at the case because It's not my forte. I do believe the cop is guilty, not of murder, but of aiding. His actions contributed to the situation that led to the suspect's death. If nothing else, that would be a reckless endangerment. And I do believe he should be charged. And I believe every officer that stood by and watched him should be charged also. They should all lose their jobs. They should all spend time in jail for what they did. If they had not acted, would he have died? Maybe he would have. There's no way to tell, because they didn't. They didn't stand back. They didn't stay out of the situation. They didn't refuse to cross the line. No, that cop knelt on this man's neck. And even when protesters and people around him were pointing out he's not breathing, he still continued, and even went so far as to threaten them with pepper spray. So yeah, I do believe he needs to be punished, and I believe every officer with him should be punished also. But what's going to happen is, if he was charged incorrectly, there's no grounds to say he killed him. He contributed to the death, but they can't prove that he killed him. Why? Because he was overdosed. And what's going to happen is, because if he gets anything but a death penalty, these people are going to go nuts. There's going to be protests in the street. You're going to have riots. Not just in Minnesota, but probably all over once again. And this is what brings what Maxine Waters says and makes it even more dangerous and makes her more culpable for the damage. By her telling them to be more confrontational, when they go out and they take to the streets, they're going to be in everybody's face, and they're going to be pushing, and they want the episodes. And then there's going to be a riot. And I honestly believe Maxine Waters needs to be charged. Someone needs to file a lawsuit on her for anything and everything that goes wrong, because it was her words that contributed. Now, in all honesty, is she to blame for it? No. Did she contribute? Oh, heck yes. It's time for YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest of them to banish her. Why? They can banish the Trump for simply saying come out and protest. They can banish her for telling people to be more confrontational. It's called being fair. She needs to be canceled for what she's doing. If you're going to have a cancel culture that attacks people for possibly inciting violence, or whose words could lead to violence, hers does. But she ain't going to be punished. The Democrats aren't going to take her off her committee seats. They're not going to tell her bad girl. No cake for you. No, what's going to happen is they're not going to say nothing. And when the protesters come out, they're going to simply tell us all once again the mostly peaceful protests, as they're standing in front of the buildings on fire. Why? Because that's acceptable. No one wants to really label Antifa a hate group. Biden won't even admit it is a group. It's an idea. Well, it's a hateful idea. It's an idea that believes you have the right to assault people that disagree with you. And Biden thinks that's okay. Kamala Harris believes that's okay. Everybody seems to think on the Democratic Party that it's okay for these people to be violent and destroy things. Well, face it, every one of them needs to be impeached, kicked out of office. Hey, it was good enough for Trump, it should be good enough for them. And if Biden can't come out and take a stand that's morally appropriate in this, stating that no violence is acceptable, this is not the way to do things, and crack down on those that are breaking the law, then he's culpable too. But I'll tell you right now, don't expect it. They're not going to go after Biden. The press will love him. Why? Because he ain't Trump. Congress isn't going to say anything to anybody. Why? Because they're not Trump. And in order to be not guilty in today's society, all you have to be is not Trump. And then, hey, it's okay. You can do whatever. Society, as ran by the Democratic Party, says that minorities should not be held to the same standards. Riots are okay as long as the rioting is against the system, or at least the parts of the system that they agree should be rioted against. A crooked election, which they don't want to admit is crooked, but every bit of evidence that's come out since then shows, yeah, there was some crookedness going on. That doesn't matter. That's not important. All of that is irrelevant. All that matters is this is something that Democrats find acceptable. Again, like I said in my episode on police reform, yeah, there needs to be some police reform. Our police agencies and our government agencies think they are above the law. They can do whatever they want, and no one is going to punish them, because the odds are no one is going to. This needs to change. But you're not going to change it by burning down the city. You're not going to change it by being a terrorist. And I don't care how the present Attorney General wants to split hairs and say that Antifa wasn't being terroristic because they attacked the courthouse at night. There were people in there. Business was being conducted. You want to split hairs, then all you're going to say, all that means is protests at night can do whatever they want, and it's not terrorism. Once again, making excuses and finding ways to justify things that they support. And the end results will be how many more billions of dollars worth of damage. And what I'm curious about is how many more people are going to die this year. As these cases go to court and are adjudicated, how many more people are going to be killed in the riots? How many more, and sadly minorities, must die before people start realizing these riots are not helping the minorities? The idea of defunding the police and getting rid of the police, that doesn't help anybody. Doesn't help the minorities that they claim that they're out to protect, because hey, they're the ones that need the police the most. Not because they're black, but because their communities have so much crime. When the police refuse to act, well, let's take a look at the statistics. Last year there were more deaths. The homicide rate increased drastically nationwide, and particularly in cities that had experienced major riots. Why? Because the cops are afraid to go in. And because the bad guys know the cops ain't coming, they know they can get away with it. Look at New York City. Look at Baltimore. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Minnesota. Minneapolis, Portland. Seattle. The cops don't act because the cops know they're not going to get supported. And the crime rate went up. The arson rate went up. The murder rate went up. All because of the protests. And if society is looking for a way to solve things, you solve it by reining the protesters in. Making protesters be protesters, not rioters. Making sure they understand coming out and protesting something because it is wrong, that's fine. But there's a line, and if you cross that line, you will be arrested, you will be caught, you will be punished. And what has the Biden administration shown them? Just the opposite. A lot of those protesters and such that were arrested last year, cases have been dropped. Why? Oh, well, they were just protesting and burning buildings, but that's not important. Yes, society's got problems. And as long as our government sits back and says it's okay, it's only going to get worse. And with people like Maxine Waters fueling the fires are going to get worse. The homicide rate's going to get worse. And then you're going to hear people like Biden saying, this is an epidemic, we're an embarrassment worldwide. Well, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to look at the world and say, yes, this is what we have become. A country filled with rioters that never get punished, where murder is looked at as irrelevant as long as it isn't by a cop against a black man. Black on black crime, not a problem. White on white crime, not a problem. But don't let the white attack a black, because then it's a problem. The reverse, no biggie. When you have a double standard, you have no standards at all. And that's what we're getting into, a society with no real objective standards. Alright, folks, that's Publius. Get ready to see the... hope you all go out, get your marshmallows, get everything ready so you can make your s'mores this weekend when the city burns down around you. Please be safe. All joking aside, be safe. Stay home. Make sure you're prepared for when these people come knocking on your door to burn it down. Stay away from them. Don't provoke them, because they've already been given the green light to do whatever they want. Please, take care of yourself. May you each have a wonderful week. Thanks for listening.